A common saying in the United States is that it is a country founded on Judeo-Christian values, or simply Christian values. This is frequently overplayed by Christians and Jews alike, and leaves out much of the rich complexity of the religious beliefs among the colonists leading up to the American Revolution, and seems to shrug at the context of the First Amendment. This general saying also hurtles over the influence of more ancient values, laid out well before the Abrahamic traditions dominated the Western religious world. It glosses over the fact that the founders were political intellectuals imbued with Enlightenment ideals and were cautious not to publicly advocate for any specific religion. The Constitution itself is Judeo-Christian only insofar as you can loosely apply the Magna Carta to its influence. That is, if one finds that the Magna Carta qualifies as the advancement of Judeo-Christian freedoms. Then again, the term Judeo-Christian is already tense with ambiguity, and did not come to be used until the 1930s, and later by Eisenhower, who had good reasons then to emphasize the shared values that Jews had with other faiths, especially that of the sympathetic Christian majority. Taken positively, the term recognizes common principles between two religions, which is an observation much more likely to be made in the United States where religious syncretism had a chance to be fleshed out. You will usually hear politicians or political pundits claim America's Judeo-Christian foundation. We will explore in this essay why this is more of a falsehood chained to a few partial truths than a widely accepted fact grounded in historical sources. Politicians, as we know, excel in rhetorical simplicities, and often pander to their religious base in a manner that doesn't get them bogged down in detail and scrutiny. Most of the prominent religious movements in the U.S. leading up to the Revolution were breakaways from the established institutions and state-controlled churches, such as the Anglican Church of England governed by the English monarchy. Such institutions would have also been able to claim a strong relationship with Judeo-Christian values, but for the Puritans, Pilgrims, Mennonites, Methodists, and the Quakers who emphasized the inner spiritual life and light of the individual, the need for religious freedom transcended whatever alleged core values bridged them back to the church hierarchies. The assertion of America's founding out of Judeo-Christian principles would also make one think these values were something specific to Jews and Christians alone, and did not contain versions of more ancient ethics repackaged into the Ten Commandments and the Proverbs. To say the U.S. was founded on Judeo-Christian values not only fails to capture the diversity of religious thought in the 13 colonies, it passes over the influence of deism and the language in the founding documents pertaining to God, which reference nature's God and divine providence. It leaves out too much of the native European thought and ever relies upon developments in the ancient Near East that gradually moved westward and morphed into very different shapes than those they began with. Even the Judeo-Christian values are not altogether unique or without more ancient predecessors, to say nothing of how they might, in every case, line up with the constitutional amendments. Egyptian laws also prohibited murder, theft, and adultery, as did early Near Eastern cultures, as seen in the Code of Hammurabi in Babylon in the 18th century BC. In both Egypt and Babylon lived the early Jews, whose scholars think first compiled the Exodus story in the 16th century BC, during or after the Babylonian exile. Curious, then, that many of the so-called Jewish values have predecessors in both places they fled or were exiled from. Even still, what about the overwhelming presence of Greek philosophy in the minds of literate, Hellenized Jews, such as those living in Alexandria, Egypt, during the time of Jesus and Philo-Judaeus? Where are their Judeo-Christian values without Egyptian, Near Eastern, Persian, and Greek influence? And it wasn't Jews or Christians that came up with democracies and republics, that was the Greeks and Romans. Even before the arrival of most of the Europeans in the colonies was the Iroquois Confederacy, governed by a great law of peace, with representatives chosen by clan mothers. This made an impact on Benjamin Franklin and is the first relatively democratic or representative governmental system known to have been practiced in North America. But beyond the historical weakness of the saying, applying the Judeo-Christian assertion to United States politics also doesn't hold up. Jesus was a pacifist, which has never been a successful ideal in United States policy, nor was pacifism embodied in the revolutionary spirit. Jesus may have been rebellious in what he preached and how he lived, but accepting and submitting to the authorities of his time was necessary to fulfill his martyrdom, even if Jesus disagreed with them. The question returns, then, of what people mean by Judeo-Christian if America's framers were effecting a disestablishment movement and not lugging all the old Abrahamic baggage into the New World. Surely one must find some common ground between Jesus himself and America's founding if they're to defend this claim. Jesus said, "Do not think I have come to abolish the law." The values of Jesus here once more do not align with the revolutionary spirit that broke free and fought against the established monarchy and church hierarchy, emphasizing a freedom of religious thought over the authority of one religion lorded over a people, in a manner Jesus would have surely never signed off on. America's founding rather resembles more of a Masonic tolerance and an Enlightenment-infused movement toward a new future the world has yet to see, a universalism that emphasizes the individual's journey to a belief that resonates with him or herself, not one merely inherited on account of coercive authority. The First Amendment certainly has much more in common with universalism than it does Jewish or Christian dogmatism. It represents a prevailing of reason and experiential explorations of the God within over the fear-based rules created by clerical authorities and gradually cemented into the collective Judeo-Christian consciousness. Continually suggesting the dominant role of Judeo-Christian values upon scrutiny becomes another generalized simplicity tossed onto a complex development. By the 1770s, it has been suggested that Jews comprised no more than 2,500 people in the colonies, making them a rather small religious minority at the time, however much they were involved in the economy and civic life. Many Jews fought in the Continental Army alongside men of other faiths. Again, it is not that there is no Judeo-Christian influence on the founding of America at many levels, but it is hardly the only one, and the saying does not land on the airstrip as neatly as it slides from the mouth. It applies more smoothly to the need to recover common morale after a great world war than it does to America's inception. We should also not accept out of hand that what Jesus preached is always compatible with the average American's values leading up to the Revolution. Jesus was moving hard against the grain, and his calls to discipleship went hand in hand with a promise that if people left behind their land, their trade, and their families, and followed him, they would inherit eternal life. Jesus was a radical in regards to his mission for his disciples, but he did not call for open rebellion by arms. The deist Thomas Paine published his Common Sense in January 1776 and sold more than 100,000 copies in its first few months, shifting the public mindset into a greater hostility against the English crown. In a letter to Joseph Reed on January 31st, 1776, Washington wrote, "I find that common sense is working a powerful change in the minds of many men. Few pamphlets have had so dramatic an effect on political debate as this one." Thomas Paine believed the cause of America is in a great measure the cause of all mankind. It would be more appropriate to say America was founded on the natural laws of man, the natural God-given rights of man, which did not require Jewish or Christian anything, as Thomas Jefferson had it when writing about the Declaration of Independence. Quote, "All its authority rests then on the harmonizing sentiments of the day." In terms of religious sentiments, this applied to more people than just those of a Christian heritage, seeing as Christianity in this day and age was a rather vague tree with many branches professing unique Christian beliefs, connected all together by one or another belief about Jesus. The divine language in the founding documents is also not skewed to the Jewish or Christian framework, expressing more of a scientific need, reconciling with the Renaissance varieties of philosophical influence and the hope of a new world to bring about the great experiment, which offered individuals a chance to test out all of the previous notions of salvation, miracles, philosophies, and politics without the rules of the church and the thorns of the crown. With the freedoms of the Constitution, the individual could better carve out an inner path to spiritual knowing, without needing to submit to anything but the new liberating laws of the land. George Washington's own Masonic deism and pluralism can be found in his letter to the Quakers. Quote, "The liberty enjoyed by the people of these states of worshiping Almighty God agreeably to their consciences is not only among the choicest of their blessings, but also of their rights. No longer could the state impose its own theocratic rule onto the citizens. Quote, as mankind becomes more liberal, they will be more apt to allow that all those who conduct themselves as worthy members of the community are equally entitled to the protections of civil government. I hope ever to see America among the foremost nations in examples of justice and liberality." Does this represent Christian values per se, or does it highlight the political genius of the time and the need for personal religious freedom? We can't look at each time a founding father mentions God and think that it must be the Christian or Jewish gods. Is it not more true that we're observing a less defined God, searched for by free people in need of a fresh perspective? It is God nonetheless, no matter the title applied, and this pluralistic tolerance is what allowed Washington to address people of different faiths on common ground. Quote, "The man must be bad indeed who can look upon the events of the American Revolution without feeling the warmest gratitude towards the great author of the universe, whose divine interposition was so frequently manifested in our behalf. Manifested it was in a fashion that liberated mankind to wrestle with the divine on its own terms, whether or not they be rooted in the Judeo-Christian narrative or dragged about by the less than savory history often accompanying it. The United States is far more of a basis for religious universalism than a basis for the expansion of Jewish or Christian dogma. It strips the government of the power to dictate what the highest religious authority is, or that anyone needs to have such an authority. It leaves the belief up to the individual, where the power of determining belief already presides. America represents a movement away from religious dogmatism, whereas Judeo-Christian implies the people involved are religiously obedient to one or the other faith. If Judeo-Christian principles don't mean the people following such principles need to profess a belief in one or the other religion, then the Judeo-Christian aspect of the argument breaks down in favor of humanism and natural law. America as a place of religious freedom unbound to historical faiths becomes all that's left. After all, there are far more writings outside of the Judeo-Christian literature that uphold human rights and make the case for the good of universal moral conduct and the benefits of the abolishment of tyranny. America is nauseous at the notion of theocracy, reinforcing the truth that within our contemplation, the integrated universe and its majesty become more apparent, and the rules man has tried to bind to God fade away to chatter in the backwoods. The architecture of our nation's capital mutely refutes the Judeo-Christian claim. It is classical, Greco-Roman, and semi-Egyptian, containing a wealth of pagan symbolism and astrologically charted buildings. Was this done willy-nilly without forethought, or does it represent a momentous phase of universalism? Even the first of the 10 Commandments would never hold up in America's foundational approach to religion, because it would seem to be Yahweh recognizing that other gods exist, but the Jews shall have no other gods but Yahweh. This is to say nothing about the incompatibility of the Hebrew Bible's gods and the New Testament God, as if somehow God the One might change on account of mankind's change in approaches. Thomas Paine, for one, lambasted this inherent scriptural tension in his Age of Reason, an influential book in the minds of French revolutionaries. Now, while I don't personally think our current translations represent the original meaning of the first commandment, this is how it's been read and often interpreted overall. The fact that Yahweh admits that other gods also existed in Moses' time, however, is not often stressed by the Jews and Christians who pretend Moses and the early Hebrews were somehow the earliest examples of monotheists. The most blatant statement opposing the Judeo-Christian principles argument comes from Article 11 of the Treaty of Tripoli. This treaty came after the Barbary pirates, operating off of North Africa, attacked American merchant ships and enslaved many crews for ransom. Without British aid in the Mediterranean, now that the U.S. was independent, the Treaty of Tripoli was a way to secure peace and end the economic disruption caused by the pirates. Article 11 of the Treaty of Tripoli, signed into law by the Christian President John Adams, reads, "As the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslims, and as the said states never entered into any war or act of hostility against any Muslim nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between the two countries." Certain thinkers still professing America to be a Christian nation are always backed into a corner by this quote, and must devise some rather elusive mental gymnastics to cartwheel over it. However, even taking into account the context of diplomatic strategy, John Adams signed it into law for the same reason the First Amendment did not pressure America to lean toward one religion over another. James Madison also helps clarify this stance, quote, "Religion is wholly exempt from its government's cognizance. The religion then of every man must be left to the conviction and conscience of every man." In his letter to Edward Everett, quote, "The settled opinion here is that religion is essentially distinct from civil government and exempt from its cognizance, that a connection between them is injurious to both." In his notes on the state of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson famously wrote, "It does me no injury for my neighbor to say that there are 20 gods or no God. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg." This captures the essence of what the new American mindset was capable of. American philosophers could now, with far greater freedom, say that whether Jesus lived or not doesn't matter. I believe for myself in God and the soul's immortality, and believe that by good works and a healthy spiritual practice, the supreme architect of the universe will find me to be a creature of beauty amidst his geometric, intelligent universe. For even the Masonic lodges in America broke free from the English Grand Lodge following the Revolution, lodges which Washington, Paul Revere, Benjamin Franklin, and many others would have been able to meet in before the war to privately discuss the reasons why severing the colonies from England was increasingly necessary. Freemasons will also find the language adopted in the Scotsman James Anderson's constitutions written in 1723 and revised in 1738, and that same sentiment expressed by the Scottish Andrew Michael Ramsay in 1737 as signs of a prevailing universalism over religious dogmatism. Masons at this time were among the minority of intellectuals who could come together and understand that it didn't so much matter if everyone believed in the same gods or holy books, but that they could live together and practice religion in harmony without killing each other over the differences. In this light, the American foundation is much more of a bedrock on which to finally build out the Enlightenment ideals and experiment with the destiny of mankind, not another launching ground for the dominance of a 30,000-headed creature representing this or that religion. Benjamin Franklin once said, "I never doubted the existence of the deity, that he made the world and governed it by his providence." And at the Constitutional Convention in 1787, he said, quote, "I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. Perhaps the situation offered by America's unwavering religious freedom can be squeezed into the following quote from Thomas Paine, who said, "The world is my country, all mankind are my brethren, and to do good is my religion." Indeed, instead of focusing on the vaguely shared values between Jews and Christians and their relevance in the beginnings of America, perhaps we should consider the movement toward universalism as the great opportunity this country affords, whose ends we are still yet far from approaching. Should mankind finally quench the furious fires of dogmatism and embody the true common ideals we need to see on an epic scale, we may eventually chart the course to that magical age of peace, somewhere rising as a glimmering star in a horizon America became the finest position to observe. For one day, in the words of Samuel Adams, quote, "The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard lie down with the kid. The cow and bear shall feed, their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. None shall then hurt or destroy, for the earth shall be full of knowledge of the Lord. When this millennium shall commence, if there shall be any need of civil government, indulge me in the fancy that it will be in the Republican form, or something better." If you would like to support the channel, please like and subscribe, and consider making a one-time donation or supporting me on Patreon with the links below in the description. Thank you.